Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Q&A. I'm a day early, but I still was able to get it in before PAX, so let's go through and check out the questions, and I hope to see all of you this weekend, well, all of you that are be at PAX anyway, but let's jump right in. First up, over on YouTube, C. Cooper wanted to know if I ever found out if the Neo BIOS Master VMC will work as a save memory if there's no Unibios chip installed in the socket. So I did receive my Neo BIOS Master, but I have not had time to test it yet. But I really am excited about this because it's for a project that I've been, I don't want to say keeping a secret because it's not a product, it's just a personal project of mine that I'm kind of excited to make a video about. So, to skip to the end, no, but it's something I really want to get to soon. The main reason I haven't just tried it right away is because if I hook this up and it doesn't work, I then want to immediately plug in a Unibios chip and test that as well, just to make sure it's not something I'm doing. And I don't have one at the moment. A friend of mine has a few that he's going to sell me one of. So hopefully I'll get to this within a week or so. And, there's definitely going to be something out there. Probably a short post on Retro RGB, but, also it's social media and everything else, because I think that's something a lot of people might want the answer to. And once again, the only reason you wouldn't want a Unibios with this is if you're using a ROM cart that already gives you all of the features that you would need. If you're using original cartridges, a ROM cart is a pretty good idea. The Unibios is a pretty good idea to have with original carts. So good question, and I'll try my best to get to that soon because I'm just as curious as you are. Over on Patreon, 8% Android said, took your advice and found a Gcomp on eBay, so to hell with the price, it's on its way. They really are good switches. They're built by a member of the retro gaming scene for the retro gaming scene, specifically for all of the signals and the scenarios that we deal with. So you're both supporting the scene and you're buying something that's designed for consoles. So overall, you'll most likely get better performance than just an average Switch. And any idea if the Retro Roundtable will be back anytime soon? I don't think so. We all have a ton of busy things going on. Maybe someday, but it's certainly not in the cards in the near future. Next, Dane Olds says they just finished up an install of a triple bypass version 2 on what looks like a Genesis 2. They showed installation pictures. Great quality work. I mean, that looks really clean and nice. And they wanted to know what people should do if they'd like to contribute to Retro RGB in a smaller way by sharing install shots and stuff. So this is the exact type of thing that we want on the wiki. So, Genesis 2, triple bypass install, VA 1.8, and there's your method versus somebody else's. This is exactly the type of stuff that I would like to see, as well as overall testing. So, there are certain... I don't remember anything about the VA 1.8, but I remember there were certain models where wires were run a very specific way to move out of the way of interference. So while the wire run might have been longer or looked like, why would you do it that way? It's because if you did it a different way, you would get jail bars or something. So that's the other information that I would love to see in there as well. It's just impossible for one or even a small group of people to keep up with stuff like that. It's going to be the community that pretty much keeps these things up to date and shares the new findings like yours. So thanks very much for sending the picture. And the wiki is so close to being done. I know I sound like a broken record, but the problem that we're having is we don't want to launch it unless we know that the backbone is solid, and because the front end could change, the layout could change. There's a bunch of things that are super easy to mix around, but the very basics of how to make a post, how posts get verified, etc., that backbone needs to be really solidified before we jump into this. And we've tested a bunch of different kinds in a bunch of different ways, but my goal is very soon to have this launched and open to beta testers at first. Beta testers just means no public sign up. You just got to contact one of us and we'll get you set up. And then once everything seems to be running smoothly, then we'll just open it to everybody. But yeah, thanks very much for sharing. Gord Captain was looking for information on how to do the Sega Saturn digital audio mod I mentioned on the Saturn page. And couldn't find the old thread on Assembler Games because that forum's gone, and was able to find it on archive.org. So that's one of the things that I want to be doing on the wiki is taking stuff like this and rewriting it and merging it over. I mean, ideally, what I would like to see is people do the mods themselves, verify them, and then post new, higher quality pictures. Not saying that some of the pictures are bad, but you know, it's 2020. Your cell phone can take a better picture than a standard digital camera would have 10 or 15 years ago. So, yeah, I mean, that's something I want to deal with once the wiki goes live. And not spend so much time on that at the moment just because it's all going to change soon. But I would love for every console to have both a video mods and audio mods page, or maybe video information, audio information with the mods listed below. We're figuring all that out. That stuff's the easy stuff. That if we have the wiki done and running and we decide we want to rearrange things, that part's easy. Getting it to the point where people could just start adding this stuff is the trickier part. So thank you for making me aware of that. And when the wiki goes live, heck, if you wanted to do the mod, maybe take some pictures and maybe you'll be the one who posts up the Sega Saturn digital audio mod. Lewis F96 said they recently bought a Rad2X cable for the Neo Geo, and the image quality is incredible. However, every time any white flash occurs on screen, I lose signal for a couple seconds. For example, in the Samurai Showdown intro, when the character cuts down the trees, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that, a white flash occurs, and then I lose signal for a few seconds. It also happens with any other game that has white flashes in the Neo Geo intro. Do you have any idea what could cause this? And a forum post suggests that it also happened on some retro tinks as well. No clue. And to be honest, the Neo Geo is the only console I haven't tried the Rad2X on. Technically, I have. I tried it with the Omega MVS and TN Fang's replacement board, and that worked flawlessly. And I also tried it on an MV1C with a prototype board, also by TN Fang, with a Genesis 2 output, and that worked perfectly as well. But I have not tested any AES consoles with it. And I'm pretty sure a buddy of mine who lives down the street has both an AES and a Rad2X. So if I remember, I'll try to follow up, but that's very strange. I'm not really sure why that would have happened. And I wish you could have, I wish in situations like this that you would have access to 3 other Neo Geos to make sure it's not your console, the revision of the motherboard, something else. But sending it back to Rob to have him diagnose it's probably the best bet, because he does have, it's a business, so they have a bunch of a bunch of consoles in the shop to test. So yeah, I'm sorry, I got nothing. But hopefully they'll have a great answer for you. And if this is something that is occurring on specific model AESs, I'd also like to find out why, because maybe there's a fix, because some AES consoles have had sync compatibility issues in the past with certain monitors and stuff, and doing a bypass and things like that have completely fixed all of it. So I hope that's not what's required. I hope you don't have to do a bypass to make this work, but if you did, you'd get better video quality anyway, so I guess there would be a trade-off. But yeah, please keep me posted. Joseph Vessel wants to know why we haven't seen something like an analog Sega Saturn, and do I think that there will be optical drive-based replacement consoles in the future for that? Joseph also goes on to talk about ODE solutions, but specifically wants to see something like a Saturn emulated console that can do upscaling and stuff like that. So there's 2 answers. The reason we haven't seen it yet is because those consoles are more complicated. So it's just going to take a lot longer to do. If FPGA recreation is even possible at all, it would take a lot longer to get there. Now, I also have kind of an opinion on this, and I don't know if this opinion will change or not over the years, especially seeing what comes next for emulation. But I feel that on all consoles that don't have a frame buffer, so the time that you press the button to stuff on the screen happening is not limited by any kind of video card or anything like that. I think the best consoles, the best replacements are the FPGA ones, because there's 0 added lag to the original, whatever the original latency on the actual console was. It just so happens that all of the optical drive-based consoles, at least as far as I know, Not because they're optical drive based, but because of how the video circuit works, they do have a frame buffer, which means that you can get software emulation to match just about the same amount of latency as the original. Without nerding out too hard, especially because it's a little bit over my head, but there are ways to do stuff like run ahead mode, so even when you add on whatever the latency is, the end result is pretty much the same. It still might be variable, but it's still close enough to the same where it wouldn't be a big deal even for professional players. So I personally think that the future of future of those types of consoles might be software emulation to allow for things like HD rendering, and even Sega Saturn has had certain modes that through emulation are able to render in high definition. It might be 480p, might be 720p, whatever, but it's not 240p or 480i. I've also seen PlayStation 2 emulation that will take a game that can only run in 480i and run it pretty perfectly in 720p or higher. So what I think is going to happen is when processing power and GPU power meets the target price point for something like this, then we'll start seeing it. And, the quality is going to vary at first. I'm sure the first to market is going to be something expensive, and then the next to market is probably going to be some garbage device from one of those companies that's known for making garbage devices, and then it'll probably all kind of even out after a while. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe a theoretical FPGA-based PlayStation 1 will end up being an overall better solution, but I have a feeling that consoles like that, software emulation is gonna add a lot more things that you wouldn't be able to do in any other scenario. Now, once again, my opinion might change as these things start to grow and evolve, and who knows what's going to be possible 5 or 10 years from now. But yeah, to directly answer your question, why haven't we seen anything like it so far? Because reverse engineering those consoles are much more complicated, and making a product that works like that's much more expensive. And do I think we'll see something in the near future? The closest thing would be the Polymega, which I've heard nothing about directly. I think it's more than 6 months late again for its release, so I don't know what's up with that one, but that would be the closest thing in the near future to it, and it's a relatively expensive device, so that just goes to put things into perspective of what it could do. But great question, and I'm really looking to see how this evolves in the future. Mr. Pete wants to know how a CRT accidentally got stolen. That was a reference to something from last week, and I guess I shouldn't have just put that out there like that. Somebody thought I was getting rid of an older CRT and offered it to somebody else for free. And when I showed up and I realized that it happened, I didn't want to cause trouble because it's something that I wanted to save, but to be perfectly honest, I had no idea where I was going to put it, how I was going to save it, where I was going to transport it to. So it was an accident. The person didn't mean to give away something of mine. They thought I was trying to give it away anyway. So I just figured, what was I going to do? Argue and cause trouble and then have a TV that I couldn't bring anywhere anyway and might very well have left it there. So I was just like, I'm going to let this one go. And I don't know if I regret it or not yet. I think there's only 2 scenarios in which I would have used that TV, and none of which would have come up since it was gone. So who knows? But yeah, I probably should have explained a little bit more about that. But hopefully that made you chuckle a little. It's a Serial Wow has a few questions about the HASS, the Home Arcade System Supergun. First, do I happen to know any sellers that are based in the US or shipped to the US that can carry any of the recommended power supplies like the Meanwell? Yeah, a ton of places, from DigiKey and Mauser to eBay. I would just check the post that Smoke Monster made and Google the exact model number. I think maybe he even put a link to an eBay seller in the description. But yeah, I mean, I got mine and it arrived like 4 days later, so definitely easily available. I think you just got to double check that you're typing in the exact model number correctly. And the second question is basically, what do I recommend for playing arcade games, the HASS or the Mister? And I guess I'm going to add Raspberry Pi to this as well. So that's a tough question to answer, and it's there's a few factors involved. First of all, just what games do you want to play? If the games that you want to play are already available on Mister, maybe that would be the best solution for you because it's infinitely less hassle to deal with. But then there's also the collection point. Do you enjoy having these very cool pieces of electronic history that, yes, might be fragile, and yes, are going to eventually require some kind of maintenance, but is owning the original something that's important to you? And then, of course, what if the games you want are not on MiSTer? Or is something like a Raspberry Pi or a computer with an arcade VGA setup going to give you the same experience that an original arcade board would? And to be perfectly honest, that's not a question I could answer. So, I have original arcade boards for CPS 1 and 2, as well as Neo Geo. Neo Geo is already on the MiSTer, and there are times where I prefer playing on the MiSTer, and there are times I prefer playing on my arcade setup. CPS isn't out yet, but it's coming. And it's important to me that I own those, because those games are both fun for me, but they're also games that you might end up playing in some kind of arcade tournament, especially around here. So I want to be able to have those and have access to those and be able to contribute to the scene around here for when there's live events. And then, of course, there's, the Raspberry Pi or arcade VGA card, or however you want to basically make some kind of emulation-based MAME box. And I'd love those too, because there's just some games that to get the true experience at home would be very costly and a giant pain, or you just load up a Raspberry Pi with some MAME ROMs and you play it with a controller and everything's fine. So I personally think that depending on your setup, there might be room for all three of those things. And you mentioned Neo Geo. How important is it to you to have original Neo Geo cartridges and an original motherboard? If it's not important at all, the MiSTer Neo Geo support's pretty darn good. But pick other things as well. You also mentioned the undammed the undammed controller adapters might be needed for this, which is another expense. That's awesome. That's something that I would definitely recommend with a Super Gun, no matter what. But also don't forget that if you wanted to, you could hand wire most arcade sticks to a DB15 port and kind of negate the need for that. It's a lot more work. You have to now mod your sticks. So, and as opposed to MiSTer and the Raspberry Pi, where you would just plug your USB-based arcade stick in. So while my answer is essentially a non-answer, I hope it at least points you in the right direction so you can make a decision on how you want your setup to be. Connie wanted to know what the editorial process is like for Retro RGB, and please let me know if I got that name correct. But the question is, do I assign found or suggested news to different people? Do I use any tools for organizing the process? At the moment, no. At the moment, all of us just kind of find things on our own. There are plenty of times where I'll say something like, hey, Smoke Monster, there's an arcade-based thing that I don't really know what it is. I think I do. Could you take a look for me because you know more about this? Or, hey, Vanessa, there's a Commodore 64 thing that I know nothing about whatsoever. Or, hey, the girl, can you write something up about an audio thing that you know more about than me? Or, or Ray, like, hey, there's a Sega Genesis homebrew ROM. Like, while everybody is very good and very rounded in their stuff, there are areas of expertise that each of the writers so far really seem to have a love for. So, as far as assigning stuff like that, it's not so much an assignment as a, hey, I know you love this stuff, or you're, know a lot more about it. Would you take this one? And that's pretty much it for the assigning things. Other than that, it's just basically like, sometimes I might ask one of the writers, like, hey, I'm super busy this weekend. Would you mind writing these two things up for me before the podcast because I shoot the podcast on Tuesday. So can you get these done? But as far as tools for organizing the process, no, nothing at all. At the moment, we dump everything into the Retro RGB Discord news suggestions, and then we kind of filter through. And that one's been a little tricky because there's a lot of stuff that's in there that anybody in the Discord can post that is neat, but isn't really a fit for Retro RGB. So it's, the writers so far have kind of just been able to recognize that on their own. And, and we still very much enjoy looking at some of this stuff. That's why we created a new section for all supporters that's media sharing. So if you have a fun stuff that might not necessarily be a fit for an article on Retro RGB, but still want to just share it to everybody in the chat, that's kind of helped filter out a lot of those. But we basically just decide what is right for the site. We never there's never been a Tuesday where I say we only have 3 things to talk about, let's get something in. Like, no, it's one of the things I love about doing this is we're not like a newspaper or a magazine that has to get a certain amount of content out. If there's nothing to talk about, I don't want to waste your time. I don't want to, sometimes I'm doing that right now, possibly rambling on about this, but as far as I would never force any kind of story like that. So, and as far as the editorial process is like for reading each individual article, any of the writers that have been here for a while, there is none. It just posts directly up as soon as they're done. I would like everybody, including and especially me, to be able to get to a point where nothing goes live until somebody else reads it and proofreads it. Because there's a million times that I've written an article, I've previewed it, I've read through it, I've gone and eaten lunch, come back, read it again, and it's perfect, makes perfect sense to me. And then I launch it, and within an hour, somebody will message me and say, hey, there's a bunch of typos, or, hey, you got this part wrong. And it's like, oh no, I wish each post would be able to get filtered. But at the moment, the main writers that just post all the time just get it done immediately and it goes right up. The occasional writers go through the submission process, and this is mostly for just keeping everything on the more secure side. So if somebody doesn't log in for 6 months or a year, I don't have to worry about people's name or people's accounts getting compromised or anything like that. And it's also to help some of the newer writers just get a better flow of things. But there is no, at the moment, official formatting. There's tricks like how to make things not double up so you don't have a thumbnail and a video that shows the same thumbnail. There's a few little tricks like that. But generally speaking, when any of the writers that go through the submission process post stuff, I just make sure the spelling's correct, grammar's correct, their THEIR versus THEY''RE, stuff like that, And occasionally I'll just move things around without changing what they wrote. So if I'm looking at the preview page and it looks a little funky, I might move an ad underneath and move the page, the thing back up or something like that. So I guess that's a really long way of saying that we don't really know and we're kind of making it up as we go. But it definitely, every time we get it mediocre or right, it feels right. And every time we get it wrong, it really feels wrong. And, one of us usually changes it pretty quickly. So it's been an amazing process, to be honest with you. There's just been so many cool people that have contributed. Anything from, hey, here's one article, maybe I could post another one this year. This is just something I happen to fall upon, to people that have posted hundreds of posts and done a really great job keeping this stuff growing and alive. So at some point, I'm going to upset somebody. It's just, it's impossible not to. And I hope when it happens, it's for the right reasons, and I hope it's just not a headbutting disagreement. But at some point there's going to be no, that's not the right content for Retro RGB, or no, you can't say that about that thing because we don't know the full story. There's going to be something like that at some point, but it hasn't happened yet, really. It's always just been a very open and friendly discussion, and really just positive. So if you are interested in becoming one of the writers, just let me know. And just also keep in mind that I would really, once again, like to lock everything back down, not because I ever want to censor any of the writers or even myself. It's just for that, second set of eyes makes such a big difference. If we did that at the moment with the amount of people we have, nothing would ever get posted. We'd, once a day we'd be able to go through each other's, whereas in the future, hopefully we'd have enough people signed up across enough time zones where if everybody logs in, if any of the editors logs in at least once a day, we'd have consistent posts multiple times a day. So I hope if that wasn't the answer you were looking for, I'm sorry for wasting your time, and please ask it again. Adam Arstall said they recently got a Neo Geo AES and are having issues with it on a BVM D24. Could this be some kind of sync issue? Funny, I did not see your post when I was talking about the Rad2X potential issues before with the Neo Geo AES. So yes, I do think it could be a sync issue. Adam said they did the bypass following the guide on Firebrand X's site and replaced the 100 microfarad capacitor on the sync line with a 400 microfarad one, and the issue remains. It works okay if I plug it straight into the SCART port on my LCD TV, which makes me think the issue could be with the BVM. So D-series BVMs do have some sync issues. Make sure VCR mode is turned on. But if you have that, then there's still some issues over something like a PVM or maybe an older model BVM. And I do think this is something to do with the Neo Geo's signal itself. So the only other thing you could do is look into different kinds of bypasses. Check out the guide I have on Retro RGB and see how it differs. If you know anybody with a scope, you could make sure that the voltage is correct. And I would just kind of double check everything. But if the issue is what I've seen elsewhere, it could require a full bypass pretty much, or some kind of other sync cleaning circuit in there. I'm kind of talking out of turn here because while I've seen the issue and I've messed with fixes, I haven't analyzed the exact root cause of these issues. So, please take this as just a general statement of it's probably a combination of the AES and the D24. And you could try a sync cleaner of sorts, whether it's the one from Insurrection, the SCART to DVI, it's basically the SCART cleaner, and then just get a DVI to BNC connector just to test it on your BVM. Those are cheap. I got that for like $7 or something. That might be a good way to try it. If you have any other kind of switch with a sync stripper built in, you could try that as well. But I have no idea what the root cause is, and I'm looking forward to digging into this to try to figure out if I can get an exact explanation, which would then, of course, mean now I have a real solution for you, not just guess and try. So, sorry about that. Mike W. has a RGB modded SNES Junior that works fine with the OSSC, but the same cable that works with that doesn't work on a 2-chip Super Famicom they recently picked up. And they had a few questions and a few things to say. One of them is wrong. No offense. I'll get to the explanation, but let me read through it real quick. The modded SNES Junior outputs TTL sync, which is not the same as a stock SNES. That's the part that's actually wrong, but let me continue. What are your thoughts on this? I've read that a sync on Luma SCART cable might work with my stock Super Famicom and also the modded SNES Junior, since the mod includes S-Video support. So there's a few things about this. First of all Japanese Super Famicom and all North American Super Nintendos, obviously not the mini, but just the regular original sized ones, they all output TTL level sync from the multi-out port and back. They did this probably for the same reason as Sega and the rest of the companies, as they didn't want to put all of the RGB components on the motherboard because that's, even if it's $1 a console, if you're selling millions of consoles and 1% of your users use RGB, then you're just throwing away $1 million pretty much, or, however, $1 for every console sold. So instead they put them in the cables. So what you would want on all of these mods is to make sure that every console, like let's say you have a bunch of different Super Nintendo consoles, all of the originals will output TTL level sync, or TTL level sync. So all of your modded consoles you would want to as well, so that the same SNES cable works on all. The same, built to spec SNES cable. Because when you start mixing and matching, that's when you start having issues. So in order to fix this problem, as long as whoever modded your SNES Junior did definitely add the Luma mod, yeah, getting a sync on Luma SCART cable would totally work. Just getting another C-Sync cable would work as long as it's built to specs, or at least should work, assuming there's no problem with the 2-chip Super Famicom that you got. And if you get a C-Sync SNES cable built to spec and now it works on the 2-chip Super Famicom, but it doesn't work on the Junior that does work with the other, that's an issue with the mod itself. It should be easily switchable too, by the way. There should be a jumper pad or something like that. So I would start by checking out the video I have on how to test your RGB SCART cables to make sure there's the right components in it. There's the C-Sync section of the website, so you could verify exactly what's supposed to be there. And also just be careful too, because if you're sending the wrong voltage to the OSSC, that could kill it. Stuff like this would probably kill it slowly, but faster than if you just used it as normal. So I would definitely check into all of that stuff. And you said it was cool saying hi to me at Portland Retro Gaming Expo. Cool for me as well. I always really love meeting everybody and hanging out. It's always so much fun. So thank you for coming over to say hi, and hopefully I pointed you in the right direction of where to go for the answer to your SNES mystery. Bad Reality had a bunch of questions, so I'm going to go through these lightning round style just for time constraints. First, any news if there will be a Wii Dual released for the first few models of Wiis, which are not compatible with the original kits that Dan sold? I believe somebody had an open source project that they were trying to port it over, but I haven't heard any updates on that, and I'm not really sure the status of the Wii Dual project itself. So I would just kind of keep your eyes open, and of course, if there's any progress that I hear of, I will make a post about it and talk about it on the roundup. Next, if they run their Wii through an OSSC set to 960p, would its video output be comparable to a Wii Dual's video output? The Wii Dual is always going to be a little sharper just because it's digital to digital. And of course the Wii Dual is 480p, and at that point it would depend on your television. So for me personally, my OLED does a very good job with 480p, but for some crazy reason it does an amazing job with 960p. So if I play a modern looking Dreamcast game, something that's modern graphics but fun style, something like Crazy Taxi comes to mind. If I play that in 480p, it looks awesome. It looks like a really great quality Dreamcast game. But if I play it in 960p via the DC HDMI, it has that sharpness of the integer double with the softness of the stretch that my OLED TV does, and it looks incredible. It looks like a PS3 game. So that's something that you would have to test on your own, and if you already have a Wii, you definitely should try it out and see how it looks on your particular TV. Next, Digital Foundry has made videos showcasing how to get good ray traced games or how good ray traced games look on a CRT. Do I know if the USB to VGA adapter that they use in order to get VGA out adds lag? No, and I would have to test it. It really depends on what the adapter is and how it does its conversion. So if it's simply an HDMI to VGA digital to analog converter, it should be zero lag because those don't process the image. They just change it from digital to analog. If it's some kind of processor, or if it's actually a video card that runs on USB, I would guess that, it would add a lot of lag. Next, do I know if speedrunners have specific rules for video game consoles that refresh their screen sub 60 hertz? So every speedrun will have different kind of rules about it depending on the console and the accessories used. And they're very protective over those rules, as it should be, because, stuff like this, we talked about the whole, is it gatekeeping to talk about using save states and all that crap from a month or so ago. But this is the one scenario which it is very important. People work incredibly hard to get these speedrunning records, and people don't want others to cheat, and competitors don't want to find out that their win was accidental because of something out of their control. So they're pretty strict in rules on this, and this is something that you would want to look up per console, per speed run, just to double check. But something like using a high-def NES kit instead of an original NES. So instead of running at 59.94, it runs at 60 exactly. There have been tests to show that if you run two consoles, you power them both on at the exact same time and you take video footage, the first hour they're identical, and then 2 or 3 days later it's off by seconds. So some speedruns say that that's not allowed. Others say that it's that period of time is not going to affect a 1 second difference in a speedrun that takes 40 minutes. So it really just comes down to it. And of course, it also comes down on education of the products to the people that are using it. I think once people took the time to explain, like, this product, like the Game Boy Advance Consolizer is the one that always intrigues me, because the crystal oscillator on that is more strict in its tolerance than the one that came with the Game Boy Advance, but the timing is, I think it's slightly off. I can't quite remember. It was a long time since it was over a year that I did that video and analysis of it. So it all depends at that point. Is if you got 20 Game Boy Advances, some might be the same as the Game Boy Advance Consolizer, some might be a hair slower, a hair faster, whatever else. So that's just something of figuring out the hardware you're using, and the community is going to kind of dictate that. But a lot of these tiny little differences won't make realistic changes to a speed run that's under a certain amount of time. So especially like a 20-minute speed run, I don't think you're going to get a half a second difference for that stuff. But it kind of comes down to the speed run itself and the rules. And the last question from Bad Reality. Sorry, I had to make a cut there, but there was a loud truck's air horn, and I wanted to save everybody's ears from that. But the question is, when playing things like 720p games on a BVM, is it better to use an HDMI to component or an HDMI to SDI? Because supposedly SDI only handles up to 422 chroma subsampling. Is this true? I don't think it's true. I think it could depend on the adapter. There could very well be an adapter that does that. But I was under the impression, and this is not a fact, this is, I think, from memory, which is never accurate, but I'm pretty sure that there are adapters out there that do HDMI to SDI or HD SDI in the full color space. I don't think they would use compressed color space for HD SDI because of the professional environments it's in. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it does handle it, and you should just check the converter. And I guess same for HDMI to component. Most just do a digital to analog conversion and don't touch the color space, but a processor might. So that's just something to look into. And in this scenario, is it better? What converter is best? HDMI to component into a BVM, HDMI to HD SDI into a BVM, or HDMI to VGA and then use a VGA, a sync combiner. So either an Extron RGB device, make your own. Definitely don't just tie the H and V lines together and put them in. That's too much voltage to be putting into a BVM like that. It probably would be okay, but that's not a risk you want to take on any BVM that supports 720p. So which is better? Whatever is the easiest for you. There might be a scenario in which you buy 3 converters and one of them's bad, one of them has the wrong specs, whatever else. But as far as just getting a good quality converter, whatever's the easiest solution for you is going to be the correct one. So I know a bunch of people that have 2 input cards in their BVMs. They use one for RGB, one for component. In that case, beautiful, just put it in the use the component one and go through there. There are some people that already have VGA going into their BVM through a VGA switch into an Extron RGB device that converts it to RGBS. So if that's the case, just grab an HDMI to VGA converter. And the very last part of your question is RGBS able to accept, or can you do 720p over RGBS? Yes, it's the same exact thing as RGB HV. It's just with the 2 syncs combined in a very specific way. And how they combine the sync affects the compatibility. So just like with the Geo AES issues we talked about before, some sync combiners will work better in some scenarios than others. So if you have any hesitation for that, just get the component video one, I guess. Roy Meyer wants to know if there's a way to force the Wii U to output 240p. No, as far as I know, no one has figured out a way to force it, and I believe the only way to add that video mode would be some serious hacking of the way the console works. I could be wrong, but the last time I checked, which was not very long ago, it was only a few months ago, there was still no way to do 240p at all through the Wii U. In your scenario, you have a PAL Wii U and an RGB SCART cable, and you want to play Nintendo DS games on your PVM. So in that exact scenario, you're only going to get 480i, and 240p would obviously look much better. And that's an exact scenario that I've used before. And I tried to play the new Super Mario Brothers via the DS Virtual Console, and there was a lot of lag in that emulation. So I couldn't finish the game on my Panasonic Plasma that had between 2 and 3 frames of lag. It did vary. It really averaged at about 2, I guess. But it was just too much. I couldn't play it. So I ended up trying an HDMI to HD SDI converter in 720p, and I played that on my BVM, and it worked perfectly. But I kind of decided I liked the look of the lower res better. So I ended up using just component cables out of the Wii U and fed those via 480p component to the BVM, and that's what I preferred to use. I liked the look of it. I think you're right. I think 240p would have looked better. But that ended up being the better solution, at least for me at the time. So if you have a way to do 480p on a CRT, even a VGA monitor, you can just get a converter. That'll work fine. Other than that, though, no, there's no forcing 240p, at least at this time. And lastly, Michael Vu has rediscovered a Pioneer LaserActive and are planning on recapping the Sega module. It only has composite out, and while they've seen RGB mod documentation, it's pretty scarce. Am I aware of anybody that might be a source of that information, or is there a video out there? No, not at all. And in fact, I think the last time I even discussed a Pioneer LaserActive, people were trying to figure out the best cap kit for it. I don't know if one's available on Console 5 or if the documentation's out. And do keep in mind that if you do end up RGB modding it, the only signal you're going to get from it is the Sega Genesis module. You're not going to be able to watch Laserdiscs through RGB, and I don't even know what would happen with the Sega CD circuit at that point. So, it's your console, do whatever you want. There's no wrong answer to this. But if it were my personal Pioneer LaserActive, I would recap it. I would absolutely take the time to make sure the caps aren't leaking. In fact, that would be step one, is open up the module and see if there's any leaking caps. And if so, you know that this has got to be done right away. If you don't know how to fix that stuff, send it to somebody who does. But if nothing's leaking, take your time. You could make a cap kit, look for others. If it were my personal one, though, I would not RGB mod it. I would just leave it alone as a very amazing piece of hardware that's now rare and expensive and kind of unique. But I'm not telling you not to RGB mod yours. I'm just saying that would be my choice if I owned it, and then I'd pick up any other Genesis to actually use. But if you do end up finding this documentation, let me know, and maybe I could contact the people that wrote it and ask them to donate it to the wiki whenever it's done. So very cool that you're able to find one of those, though. Even though I don't really have a need for a Laserdisc player or a Pioneer LaserActive, it's one of those things that I always wanted, and if I get an opportunity to pick one up at a reasonable price, I will absolutely recap the whole damn thing, make sure it's working, and then probably just leave it on I was going to say leave it on a shelf, but those things weigh like 1,000 pounds, so I'll leave it on a bottom shelf of something in storage just until I find a good use for it. Well, that's about it for this week. This one was another long one, and nobody complained last week about the length, so I'm just going to keep doing what I do. And with these supporter videos, I really want to do what you want me to do. So if you say nothing, I assume that means everybody's cool, and proceed as follows. If anybody wants me to shorten it up, change it up, please let me know. I really just want to provide something kind of neat as a thank you to everybody who supports. And if you're new to all of these, please post your question anywhere that you support. So whatever the support service is, Floatplane, Patreon, whatever, just ask whatever question you want wherever the newest support post is. The way these services work, it's kind of impossible for me to tell if there's new questions asked to old Q&As, so I really got to just take it 1 week at a time, and every new Q&A, I'll go back the next week, read that last one, and ask all the questions. Also, with respect to everybody, the comments are left on YouTube for algorithm reasons, but I don't really pay attention to any of those comments there, because this is just a thank you for all of the people that support. I do answer a ton of questions on every other video, as well as on social media, and heck, if you meet me in person, feel free to fire away, and I'll do my best to answer any questions anybody has. It's just these specific Q&A videos are a thank you to the supporters. So my apologies in ignoring everybody else, but I just want to keep the focus on thanking the people that support directly. So anyway, thank you again for all of your support. I hope to see anybody at PAX that's going to be there. I hope I get to meet you, and I'll see you next week.